I love art.
Can we do it?
That's the first thing I want you to know. If nothing else, I want you to know that. Am I particularly good at creating it? No. I was not born with the affinity or attention span to become really good at any art at the age of 24. But I am a great consumer of it. You could argue that art is made for profit, especially these days. But I'd argue that a majority of the art made by us as a species has been for the sake of art itself. Whether it be the monuments of the Mesopotamians, the cultured architecture and pottery of the Romans, the paintings of the Renaissance, and even the modern art pieces that we are able to witness in our day-to-day lives. Art has stuck with us from the beginning, and it will be with us to the end. I'm lucky enough to be born in an era where I can consume as much art as I possibly want. I fight to appreciate every single piece of art I do consume. And I get FOMO sometimes from the art that I'm going to miss out on. One of my favorite forms of art is the cinema. Movies. It's one of the best things we do as a people, right? It's one of the best art forms out there, I would say, and it's very particular to our time. Only a couple generations ago was the first movie filmed and displayed to a public audience. And since that first film, we have come leaps and bounds in the technology and what we're able to display on the screen. Another cool part of it is so many groups of people come together to make these films, right? It takes the effort and diligence and dedication of more than a handful of individuals, no matter how small the film, to get it out, to publish it, to make sure that people like me can see it. Untold amounts of work. And at the end of it, you get an hour to 3 hours of film, not many of which I've seen. And that's the problem. I have not seen enough movies. I want to fix that. A form of media I've consumed way too much of is YouTube. The first YouTube video was posted in 2005. I was born in 2001. I grew up with YouTube. Fred, Smosh, what is that? Ray William Danger, that guy. I remember those dudes. And ever since I was the age where you start thinking what you want to do with your life, I wanted to be a YouTuber. I have never, ever actually pushed anything towards that goal. It's always just been a pipe dream, an idea that I had. Like, you know what, maybe one day if I have enough time, I'll give it a shot, if I find anything interesting enough. That's yet another issue that I have to address. I bought this microphone for about $100. I gotta use it. So, in order to, 1, watch more movies, 2, do this YouTube thing, and 3, use this microphone, I am going to be reviewing movies off of the 1001 movies you should watch list. These movies are not movies I would necessarily watch or even recommend to anyone. But there are 1001 movies that are allegedly important enough to film history that dying without watching them is taking away from your life. So who am I to argue? So we're going to watch a bunch of movies. Well, I'm going to watch a bunch of movies. I'm going to talk about them, review them, and then tell you if I think you should watch them. Let's get into it. Howdy, Editing Rizmo here. I lost the footage of me doing the wheel, but I still have the wheel itself. So let's go over there and see what's up. And the first video will be Philadelphia. I'm standing now. With these reviews, I'm not going to start off with a spoiler review. I'm going to give a spoiler-free review and then get into the actual nitty-gritty stuff, right? So spoiler-free Philadelphia review. It's great. It was, I think, the perfect movie to start this whole series off with, because I never would have watched this movie if I hadn't been doing the series. When I started watching the movie and it went on, I thought it was about a whole different topic, and then a mini twist happened halfway through. I realized, oh, that's what's going on. And it changed the context of the movie. It made all the scenes more powerful. It made the message of the movie clear and effective. Loved it. 4.75 out of 5. Now, for the spoiler part, it's about AIDS. I thought it was about cancer. So when I found out it was about AIDS, really changed everything up. It really gave me a great insight on how bad the AIDS epidemic was. Being a Gen Z kid who grew up in the early 2000s, I wasn't there. All I did was hear about it. All I did was hear about how terrible the epidemic was to the gay men especially. And to actually see it, to see really good representation of it, at least in my opinion, a good representation. It was very educating. I learned a lot from this movie. Once again, a 4.75 out of 5. Now, revisiting the wheel of movies, we will be watching The Breakfast Club. Spoiler-free review. I've heard about this movie for my entire life. Whether it be in little niche communities I was in, references in popular TV shows, the beginning to one of my favorite songs ever. I've heard about this movie so much. And I never really heard what it was about. I just heard it was good and that I should watch it. Having watched it, a bit overhyped. I expected more from a movie that's been referenced so hard in culture, at least in my culture, that while watching it, there were times where I was really expecting something else to happen, and that thing did not happen. It was a good watch, but it never really made me feel like I was watching the movie I thought it was going to be. 3.8 out of 5. Now, for the spoiler part. I write the spoiler-free review after watching the movie, but before research, right? Like, those are my immediate thoughts, my immediate feelings, and then I'm going to do a little research after the movie to look more into the context of the film, right? Because a lot of these films are going to be older than me by a couple years, right? Obviously, if the movie's from like the 1950s, I'm going to go into it giving it a little more grace for the time it was from. But if a movie's from like the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, it's going to get a little less grace. The Breakfast Club is a victim of that, per se. After looking more into the film, I now realize why it was so loved and became a cult classic, because there wasn't a teenage there wasn't a concept of teenagers before like the 90s, I guess, and those teenagers didn't have like their own individual independence until like the 80s, 90s. They were just a form of life. You know, they went to high school not because they were teenagers, but because they just needed somewhere to put the kids that were that age. You know, they were still children. The Breakfast Club was part of the era where they started to become their own individual class, when they were no longer just stereotypes, but actual people who should be listened to and understood and thought about a little more than just kids. That's why this movie was so big in its time, is because it was the first piece of media to do that for them, which is cool. It made the film better in my eyes, right? I'm not going to say that my rating of a 3.8 has changed, but it went from a film that I wouldn't recommend to a film that I would recommend with that knowledge. That being said, let's revisit the spinner. The third movie will be The Barefoot Contessa. Going back to Philadelphia and The Breakfast Club, I probably never would have watched Philadelphia without it being on this list. The Breakfast Club would have been watched at some point, probably not this early, but it would have been watched at some point. I 100% for a fact would have never known the existence of the Barefoot Contessa. The only thing I knew about the Barefoot Contessa was that it was a restaurant show, like with a woman cooking. I never watched it, but that's who I knew the Barefoot Contessa from. So to learn that it was a movie from the 50s was kind of like, oh, well, that just got buried, didn't it? I love this movie. Like, it's one of my 2 favorite movies. Now there are 2 on my letterbox. Check that out. It was genuinely an extremely pleasant viewing experience. There were times when my Gen Z brain would get a little bored with what I was watching, and I'd kind of like want to, I want to pause it and stop watching. But it was so few and far between for a movie from the 50s that I was impressed by the end. So as I said before, I'm not going to let that affect my rating, because it's from the 50s. This movie is closer to 100 than I am to when I was born. So that's crazy. Do you have something to say? Rating 4.8 out of 5. Now for the spoiler part, I'm not going to give any real spoilers for this movie. It is worth watching all the way through to the end, because the end is a really good classic twist. Okay, I do have one slight spoiler, but it has to do with a thing I don't like about the reception of the movie. That's the reviews, especially on Letterboxd. In the movie, the female character never gets her inner voice heard. We never hear her thoughts. She's the main character. She's what the movie is about. She is the Barefoot Contessa. But we never really hear what she's thinking. We hear what all the men around her are thinking. I think even one woman at one point. But never her. Never the main character. People don't like that. They say it's misogynistic, sexist, downplays her character, you know, and that's understandable to a certain point. But that is the point. In the very beginning of the movie, they say, and I quote, "From the minute she waved back up at the Statue of Liberty, everybody wanted to know everything about Maria.
And they wound up knowing nothing because there was nothing to know. Believe me, what they said in Madrid was true. This bundle of passion, this hot flame that burned from the screen, was a real untouchable. The columns and the wolves were after me night and day. But how could I tell them who she was with or when I didn't even know who she knew? I can tell you this. It is entirely possible that Maria da Mata went to her grave without ever once being inside of the Stork, El Morocco, Ciro's, or the Mocambo. You've got to admit, this is not normal. But what was normal about this whole business from start to finish? Here is a doll who, on the opening night of her first picture, with no known interest in men, much less romance, whose private life is strictly private, but who, the people have decided, is already a star.
So, we're not supposed to know. We're not supposed to know what she's thinking. That's the point of the movie, that they put very clearly. She's a private woman who does not put her thoughts out there to anybody, especially not the audience, who we are. We are mentioned. We want to know all about her. We're watching a movie about her, and we only ever hear what people think about her, what people interpret her actions as, because that's how she lived. So to give the movie a bad rating because of that aspect is, I don't know, it's flimsy at best. That's what I mean when I say I don't want to let my Gen Z brain affect the rating for these films. Because if I just looked at it from the perspective of a Gen Z person and then delve deeper into the actual meaning of the film, I would have left the same review. It is kind of weird they don't hear from her at all. Like, ever. You hear from random dudes in her life. Not random, but one or two of them is kind of random. Never from her. It's disappointing, but it's supposed to be disappointing. You're supposed to be left out. Because in the context of the film, the audience members who wanted to know more about her were also disappointed and left out. So, the film succeeded in its goal. That being said, let's revisit the wheel of movies. The fourth film will be Once Upon a Time in America. Before we do that, let's give a quick round of applause to our first filming mistake, guys. I know, right? A monument. First video, too. It's great. I turned the camera off. It didn't turn it back on. But, picking back where we left off, my short, spoiler-free review for Once Upon a Time in America is, and I quote, "It's a long mob movie, and I don't like mob movies." 1.5 out of 5. I wrote that sentence after finishing the film. I watched the film in 3 parts. The first time I stopped was about an hour and a half in. The second time I stopped was at the intermission. And the third time I just finished all the way through. And each time was longer than the last, even though the amount of time watched was shorter, right? Like, literal-wise. It was a film that I only finished because I had to. There were moments in there where I was like, wow, this is certainly a film. Some moments that stood out to me were just the obscene amounts of child skin showing, which was just wild to me, and the most graphic depictions of assault that I've ever seen. And that's kind of the point of the film. After doing more research, it was meant to be a real look into the dirty, disgusting parts of America that really weren't being shown around the time the film was made and seen. In the 1940s, everyone thought America was like a golden city, you know, like nothing bad could happen. When in reality, the undercity of America didn't go anywhere. It was still there. It was just not being seen because who wants to report or make media about the worst parts of America? Well, this guy did. It was his last work. I wish I could appreciate that fact. I wish I could appreciate the fact that this film was made to leave an impact on its viewers. Not a good impact, but an impact nonetheless. But I really can't. As I said before, I really tried to not let my Gen Z brain affect how I view these films. But this one is kind of impossible. It just grossed me out, like a lot. It just grossed me out. The reviews that I read from the time really remarked how revolutionary, right, some of these scenes were and how like wide in scope they were. To me, though, it didn't leave any impact at all. It was a couple of nice city shots, don't get me wrong, and there were some elaborateness in some of them, but nothing that was like wowza, nothing that I haven't seen in films already from around that time period. The tragedy of the film does not make it a good film in my eyes. There are some good moments. I love the labor parts where they went into the labor movement and things like that. That was great. I love that. That was the best part of the film for me, personally. Everything else was just kind of obscene and gross. And from what I can tell, it's like one of the best mob movies out there when compared to like The Godfather. It's either you like The Godfather or you like Once Upon a Time in America. And The Godfather's on this list, and I do hope it's better than this one because, as I said before in my short review, spoiler-free review, I am not a fan of mob movies. Never have been. Don't think I will be. And that's going to be put to the test when I watch The Godfather. So once again, would I recommend this movie? No. 1.5 out of 5. Now, a point of personal interest, and I think a good conclusion to this review and video as a whole, is this proves one part of me doing this list. I will not like some of these movies. Maybe a lot of these movies I won't like, but that's not the point. The point is to watch these movies that I would never have watched anyways. Hopefully I'll take something away from the movie, whether it be good, bad, or a little in between. With that being said, that concludes this video. I definitely plan on doing more of these. I'm only at 4 out of 1,000 to 1, so I have to do more, right? And I want to release at least one video a month with more movies jammed into the video. Not jammed in, but enough to where I have substance. Make the videos longer, record more, and actually like clean up my process. It's gonna be a lot of learning, a lot of editing, and watching movies is gonna be the longest part. But cleaning up the process and then just pumping them out, seeing what other videos I can pump out while I pump out these. It's gonna be less of a pumping, more of a casual releasing. I don't want to rush these. I want to make them worth something, have some real sustenance to it, and improve my craft, my Minecraft. No, my making video craft. No gaming yet. But yeah, that concludes this video. Like, subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one.